questions from the audience? There were a bunch of different scenarios. If everyone remembers them, I have questions. I can start it if no one has one. Okay. So let's see. Dr. Walker, I have a question about tech. So I get questions. I'm in that space a lot. I'm speaking at a Watt Poultry event in a few weeks about the challenges with technology. And you really struck a big chord with me talking about trust with technology, right? You're testing something out. And I've told so many people that if, first of all, it is word of mouth, farmer to farmer. That's the true test right there, right? If it works or doesn't. Someone hears it works, they're willing to try it. Someone hears it doesn't work, they're not. So how do you break that barrier and have some of that patience? Because we're all busy, growers are busy, they often have second jobs. If it breaks down and they can't use it again, they're done and there's no bringing them back. So how do you work through that?
I think it's a really good question as I think a lot of folks are looking to technology, and that's where I do think the boots on the ground are important. I will say one of the challenges, the major limitation that I see to most of the tech that folks are wanting to roll out is that these tech companies are not built for deployment. So they make the idea, they create the tool, and they're not equipped to support it, and they haven't built that into their plan. And so, and they also don't realize that they really do need to support not just the implementation and the install. They're usually good for the install. And even that, sometimes they can be a challenge because they don't recognize that farmers' schedules don't fit and all of these other things. And again, like, what are you going to do when it's not working? And like, I tried to call you at 10. He's like, well, he's busy. Like, you need to call him at 6 a.m. Like, that's when he can talk to you. And so I think that's my challenge. And what I've challenged like tech folks that have wanted to reach out to look at stuff like, listen, like you need to understand you're working with farmers and that you have to have a team to support deployment. And if you're not going to do that, you cannot broadly adopt technology. Like there's too much variation in farm styles, farm types. And so I do think it's a huge limitation. And the fact that I do think investing the time to get it right the first time a little, again, like that was a great example for us. Like, man, we should have done the work. We should have come in first to really look at, are we ready for the technology? Like this assumption that like it's plug and play and everybody can do it. Like, and that's what I gave them, that tech company, the feedback. I'm like, if you're going to do this, if you want to be successful, you need to make sure you do the work first to make sure that your folks are prepared to what to do with it. So that's one of the concerns I have around tech is that, they like to sell it as a plug and play. It's going to work and all that. And there's multiple hurdles that I think we need to think about on that. It's not just about paying some subscription for your access to the information. So it is a challenge.
Thank you. Does anyone else have anything to speak to on that?
I think the one item I'll add in working with a few tech innovators that are working on that deployment is making sure that it's going to function in the real world. So is it going to be rodent proof? Are mice going to eat through the wires and then it doesn't work? Is it going to work in a dusty or very moist environment, depending on where you are? And some technology that I helped test about a year and a half ago. The other thing is, particularly in a chicken barn, is you're typically in very rural areas where Wi-Fi is already very limited. And then you're in a building that's covered by metal, and that further limits your ability to access internet or Wi-Fi. And so it's trying to make sure that it's going to work in very rural settings, and that it's pretty easy to use and safe to use. So.
And then add Amish on top of that. Even more difficult. Anyone else on that? I mean, I just had that experience with technology actually, where I was trying to get some technology installed in a facility here. And ultimately, after 3 months of conversations, it was that I was going to pay $5,000 to install it and troubleshoot it myself. So I know what that's like. I said, no, thanks. Um, and yell at me. I would yell at you. So, if you have any other questions, but, for Dr. Kidding here, um, I heard you say gas stations, and that again brings me back to the PED days. And there was a study, I forget who did it, but basically they swabbed the welcome mats of 10 different Casey's gas stations, and 100% of them came up positive for PED. B. So, how do you deal with that with biosecurity? I mean, truckers got to eat, right? They got to go to gas stations and get gas.
Yeah, I would say there's other implications, right? Not just going to the gas station, but who are you going to hang out with on the weekends? Are you going to go to a party I mean, you can get into the weeds on that kind of stuff. We have taken the stance that we're going to control what we control, and we're not going to interfere with people's personal lives. So that's our stance.
Thank you. And yeah, they might be somewhat big, but those little piglets, I like to say that chicks are liquid. And for the first week, they can get into anything. Does anyone have any questions for Dr. Kidding?
Is that working? Okay. So this is kind of building on what somebody asked online, like during one of the talks earlier. But I think you could all speak to it in different situations. They asked about how you could biosecurely add enrichments to barns. Because obviously, like you were saying, they can't touch the ground. So how would you like add straw, which is like biosecure, or like different enrichments in like poultry barns?
For pigs, straw it's not a biosecurity concern, it's a manure handling concern. So the way that we handle manure, we cannot have straw in the pits. They would not, our lagoons and our pits would not operate if we clogged them with straw. So that's the limiting factor. There are, and we have trialed enrichment devices. There are devices that are manufactured that we have trialed, and our experiences with it is it's novel until it's not novel. And like many enrichment options, we've been unable to quantify any improvement. And so there is a challenge in terms of justifying purchasing the equipment. But for us, speaking to straw specifically, it just does not work with modern housing systems.
I can speak to dairy because that's probably my main area of expertise. And as we realized with high path AI, we don't understand biosecurity in dairy, nor do we practice it. Simply and simple. But we need to, right? So it's thinking about how we do that. And so, but not nearly to the same level. So we don't have those, we have the luxury of not sort of being limited by that really. Yeah, I think we need to do better. We need to be better neighbors. But even within, I'll say like one of the limitations about adopting cow brushes, cows have even biosecurity within the system, right? So of transferring, sometimes cows have tail mites, where I've had farmers say like, I don't want those because finally got tail mites figured out. I don't want to spread them. And so there are those challenges to figure out like, how can we make the enrichment work? Like, and for brushes or lots of reasons. So I think, to your point, the challenge is figuring out what enrichments can work in what systems. And to your point, for the brushes, we're trying different kinds of brushes because maybe this one works, maybe that one doesn't. Those folks can't put in that kind of brush or all those sorts of things. So part of it is trying to figure out what works within that system that they can manage, that's useful and meaningful.
Have you had demonstrable improvements with the brushes, like some actual production metrics?
Yeah, well, so it's interesting. And so that's where I think for the brushes, it's hard to, I think it's gonna be hard to quantify. We had improvements like from that farm was our baleage project, and we demonstrated some improvements there. But I think some of the things, it's those intangibles that we look at. And so we've only had the one farm, which was the trial brush, to say like, will they even use it? Because everybody said like, they're not going to do it. And so Marcel, who's the farmer, he's noticed like, he's like, the pigs, he's like, their faces are so clean. And so like the goop around their eyes and all that. So he's noticed those things. But for me, the big important one was, we got an email back from him, and he told Tim, who's our extension specialist that we worked with, he's like, Tim, I know you want to quantify this. He said, but I'm going to tell you, I know my pigs are happier. And when my pigs are happy, I know I'm doing better. And he has talked about how it's just nice to go into the barn and see the pigs, behaving these certain ways. And so he continues to watch them. Like, one of my curiosities is, do they continue to use it, right? So I want to know, like, in 3 months, are the pigs still interested? So far they are. And for me, again, it's the value of having employees who want to be in the barn and around the barn, and seeing that has probably been the biggest benefit that we've seen so far.
So from a biosecurity standpoint, I think it depends on sort of where you are in the pipeline, as we would call it. In my prior role, when we were introducing anything, we went through lab testing for a lot of it to make sure that it was not going to be introducing a pathogen. So once we felt that something was safe and it was provided by a supplier that we had good understanding of their quality control system, then it would be something that we could test. I think from the other aspect of biosecurity is usually on poultry, we tend to be all in, all out on a farm or in a barn in most operations. And so if we have an enrichment there, ideally it's going to be something that can be cleaned and disinfected and then reused. So from a sustainability standpoint, we don't want to constantly be reintroducing something like a straw bale every single flock. Because we know that's putting that flock or that farm at biosecurity risk every time we introduce that. So the pictures that I showed of the sort of the hut style enrichment, it's a very similar material to what we use for the blackouts on poultry farms anyway. So it's something that we know we can source and we can clean and disinfect, and then we can hang it on the wall between flocks when we're doing a clean out or removing dust or spraying down walls or whatnot. So the other thing with the PEC stones, I was talking with a colleague in Canada last week, and it had recommended that they consider trying those for some of their new breeder farms. And they are, and I said, try elevating those if you can, but consider the safety and security of your barn. And she said, well, it's a brand new barn. We have pretty good trusses the way we build barns in Canada. And so they were able to hang them, and instead of putting them on a little platform on the floor. So from a biosecurity standpoint, getting them off the floor, I think it keeps them a little bit cleaner, but she had to make sure that it was, from a safety perspective, not going to fall and hurt somebody or hurt something.
I would definitely agree with your take on making sure the material or whatever you decide to use can be washed, sanitized, disinfected. Another really simple thing as well is a lot of our growers use homemade enrichments in the barn, and those are something easy that could come in with the flock and it can be thrown away after the flock. So
I'm going to throw out a completely different perspective. My birds are outside anyway, so I don't care that I bring hay into the barn. In all seriousness, we hay our own fields, and so it's the same hay out in their pasture that they're in anyway. And we do let it sit before we bring it into the barn. But it's a great tool and a great resource for when we have to confine birds.
So it's directed at Dr. Crumpacker, but I'd like to hear everybody's opinion on this. So you described an equipment failure that caused a mortality event. Seems like that's a hazard that's reasonably likely to occur. Probably not the first time it's happened, maybe on that farm, but not in your operation. What's the way that you can keep that from happening again. And of course, you know, you have to balance that with the perspective of, you know, being the nanny state and providing too much oversight.
Yes, good question. Um, so in this particular situation, those stoves aren't used until sort of middle age in the flock when our brood birds are let to our full house. And that's a process that is oftentimes overlooked within our system. You know, we focus a lot at placement. We do pre-brood checks, so all stoves and things should be checked then. But within our system, it's half house brood, so they don't even care about the stoves in the back. So, you know, there's room for opportunity sort of in the middle of the flock. You know, we focus a lot on the beginning and the end, but there is a lot of things that go on through the middle of the flock that, you know, and some things happen. We just can't avoid. But this particular situation could have been resolved.
I think it's human nature that we learn more from our mistakes sometimes than our successes. And I think Jen was talking before about how if a farmer has something, they're pretty good to share it. And from my experience, particularly working within complexes, is something happens to one grower, pretty much everybody's going to know about it pretty soon. And I'm not sure if that's the truck driver, rumor mill, or how that word gets around, maybe the service techs. But, you know, if you have a generator that for whatever reason doesn't run when it's supposed to and you lose a house of birds, I can pretty much guarantee you that farmer's probably never, ever going to have that happen again, because it's going to make him or her double check, triple check everything that's going on. But it's also going to send ripples through that complex. I had a woman working for me several years ago, and she had originally come from sort of the Mississippi, Alabama area, and they'd lost a house or two with generators that just stopped running after they had been running. And she said, you know, that's one of the things as a service tech that she was checking on every single farm and talking with growers about, just really trying to communicate those preventative measures and the importance of that. Because if you've never had that issue before, you may not realize the importance of it. So I think sometimes just talking about it and helping people understand the why is really critical, but also doing those startup checks and those checks throughout is really key. So, you know, most welfare audits have requirements for emergency plans and emergency contact lists. And, you know, that's a box check that we all do when we're doing audits, but I think helping people understand why that's so important is really key. So that way they understand the relevance of that so that we can respond when there is an emergency.
I think just jumping off and tying to the paper that you recently published about HACCP, right? So it's developing this thought process as we go through the farms, right? And we talk about it, but I think to your point, so much of that paperwork stuff, and, you know, I think again, farmers get tired of hearing to me about, you know, Jen, you worry too much. I'm like, well, yeah, it's my job. It's what we do. But they'll learn more about it if they hear it from another farmer and they experience that. But I think one of the things that I try to, having been through some of those issues, is also recognizing managing the people in that situation, because the guilt that can come with that, especially if it's sort of an epic fail. But helping them manage that and avoid that, and just figure I'll reveal myself as a Swiftie, say like, well, now you know, right? Move on, we'll learn the best, and what can we do next time to prevent it? And I think whether it's, I don't know if you guys use producer letters, or like we had a few things that we had done online, like webinars to let producers share, right? Again, so let them share experience, or what are you doing for that? So it doesn't seem so silly, like Jen's telling me I got to check my generator. That just seems goofy. But if the farmer says, man, am I glad I checked my generator, like then it doesn't seem, you know, grandma over here is just being a worrywart and giving us another thing to add to the checklist. So
In the swine industry, part of our audit tool, the common swine industry audit, it's required to start your generator up every 6 months. So we observe those records, and so that kind of helps with unexpected failures, just making sure that it's running properly, at least biannually. And then a culture that we have, we get some pretty aggressive storms out in the panhandle. And so if we're expecting a storm, we check fuel levels in generators where animals could be affected. And we've also gotten into a culture of just physically going out. Of course, we have alarm systems in all of our barns, so if temperatures are getting above a certain point, there's gonna be an alarm that rings out, and the alarm company will call until someone picks up. So that can be a fail-safe, but sometimes with storms, power goes out, and we just made a culture of getting out there as soon as it's safe for people to get out there and check on the pigs.
Thank you. I have a follow-up question for Dr. Krumpecker. So to me, your scenario seems like the grower should have been checking his stove charts. I mean, he's been a grower for a long time. Maybe he'd gone through some MPV trauma, but letting your barns get to 50 degrees at night seems like a no-brainer to me. So how do you have that conversation?
Yeah, so in this situation, you know, the way our houses are set up is, we breed at half house, and then let the full house, and he had just let the full house 2 days ago. No, we don't move. It just goes half to full. So in this particular situation, you know, a lot of the growers wouldn't have, they should, but they may flip off the switches, or the sensors may not be pulled in for the back half of the house. And so, so he didn't know. He had no idea that his stoves were, not functioning properly. Now, that's not to say that if he did know, you know, he just may not have decided to fix them. But, oh yeah, I mean, it all, you know, their focus is to make money and buying parts and replacing stoves and this and that. You know, they don't always have welfare in mind. A lot of them do, but some of them don't. You know, if it doesn't make them money, it can be very difficult at times.
I totally understand that. I've never had to make those decisions, you know, for my livelihood. So I get it. Thank you.
You know, the poultry industry comes under a lot of criticism at times in this country because of the contract system. But those contracts in a lot of companies, they will have a biosecurity addendum or they have a welfare addendum now. And they have been put in there purposely to draw the attention to those two topics, but also to give companies a legal recourse. So, you know, I think in general, veterinarians like ourselves and technicians really want to work with the growers and give them the benefit of the doubt and help them be successful and help make sure the health and the welfare of the animals is optimal and the productivity is where we want it to be. But, you know, there are letters that are occasionally sent to help remind growers of their expectations because they have signed a contract and it's legal and binding, and you hate to get to that, but that sometimes helps in those situations. And with the company-owned or farms that I work with a lot now, where they've got company management there, again, they're an employee. If they're failures and it's deemed to be due to lack of attention to detail or not doing something, then there are employment consequences. So you hate to say that, but I think the industry globally at least takes welfare extremely seriously. And we just say we've got to do what's right for the animals, and that includes everybody that's involved in that system.
We have another question from online. This is from Dr. Greg Fraley from Purdue University. He is an avian endocrinologist. He said that they've thoroughly enjoyed today to start. They've had like a little viewing party and wanted to thank all the speakers for speaking today. And he said that some of them have been involved in redeveloping some auditing tools for commercial ducks, and was wondering whether there was any thoughts on the effectiveness of annual audits to improve animal welfare outcomes. Yeah, I think it's broadly speaking.
Well, you guys can maybe answer it better than me. I'll take the first stab. So we audit internally 100% of our sites every year. So we have about nearing 1,000 sites. So we have an entire team of auditors that audit every single site every year. We started putting a lot of weight, and we actually have an indice that is based on scores, not only meeting production parameters, but their safety index, their welfare index, all get wrapped up into a score, and we rank farms and we award farms, top 10 farms. And so building that culture of like, hey, this stuff matters, and it may not be the audit tool itself, but it's the content of the audit that we're continually reviewing and talking with caretakers is what matters. And when our message is always, if it doesn't matter to you, it does not matter to them. And so when I go on a farm and if I don't talk about euthanasia, they're not going to think it matters to me. So when we go on and we perform the audits, every single year, we touch on the same stuff every single year. We reiterate those points that they're important. So it may not be the tool itself, it's just the culture of caring and getting that feedback on what you can improve on.
Yeah, I think to that. So if the question is merely, does an annual audit improve welfare? I would say no. Because again, it's the people, right? It's what you do with it. And so I'm not sure what the magic number is. Do you need to have somebody come in every year? Is it every, a lot of industry programs is every 3. The way I've designed my programs is it's benchmarked. So again, so it's not, maybe not a grade. I think the same idea though is you benchmark them. And part of it was incorporating that reward system where if you benchmarked in like based on, we had key welfare indicators for cattle, dairy cattle, if you benchmarked in the top 25%, we would come back in a couple years. If you benchmarked in the middle, we'd come back in a year. If you benchmarked at the bottom, I'm going to see you in 3 to 6 months, right? So you put your effort where you need the work, and then you reward folks that are doing well by leaving them the heck alone and let them continue to do well. But also have some things that you can keep an eye on to make sure, because the wheels can fall off quickly, right? So what am I going to monitor in the meantime? So I may not audit you in 2 years, but I better look at some basics and make sure I still have people come by and take a look at things to make sure things haven't changed. Because a lot of the wheels can fall off quickly, whether it's a sickness in the family, these things impact that. So I think using that, and again, using the data to leverage, I find that farmers come in many, just like people, their drivers are different. So just being able to benchmark them and share that information, you're going to drive behavior because you're going to have, 25% of your farmers who are extremely competitive, who always want to be at the top no matter what. And so they're going to do stuff just because they want to be better than everybody. You're going to have farmers who just who want to be better than average. And then there's farmers who just don't want to be them. And then you quickly identify your bottom 25 who don't care. And then you know who you don't need in your supply, depending. And that goes back to the management of the risk tolerance of the business is, do you want to deal with those? Because it's also usually those 25% that cause the other 90% of your problems. And so it's nice to be able to identify farmers who don't align with your business priorities and things like that. But to me, that's the, let the data drive it. And I can say for the dairy audits that we did see an improvement. So we were able to show an improvement in locomotion scores and outcomes. Biggest improvement we actually saw was in calf body condition because we talked to farmers and got them to adopt better feeding practices. And so where we started off seeing many calves that were thin, now on a lot of those farms, it's hard to find thin calves these days because that has become contagious and farmers have learned we should feed calves more. So that, I think from a dairy perspective across the industry, that's probably been the one thing that's markedly improved across is just calf body condition. Yeah.
Do you think it's because you're there having the conversation about calf conditions and the scoring of it, or because it's actually recorded on the audit that they care about it?
I think it's more about the conversation. I mean, again, to me, the audit's just the tool. The audit is the tool to have the conversation, to track progress, to motivate. So it all depends on how you're using it, but the audit is the tool, and it's what's that little Swiss Army knife? You can use an audit as a fork, Or you can use an audit tool as a Swiss Army knife, and it can do lots of things. I think too many people use an audit as a fork to just stab people. But used well, audit tools can do all of those things if you got the right people who have the bandwidth and the support to do that, and build the relationships.
I think the tricky part about audit tools are, number one, you have to have a guideline. If you're going to check up on somebody and verify something, then they have to know what they're supposed to be doing, and so how they're going to be judged. So I think that's number one. I see some tools that it's just, okay, we're going to come out and we're going to check these things, and people say, well, okay, I got this score, but I don't know why, because I didn't know what I was supposed to be doing. I think the fallacy with audits are, depending on the content, it's just a paperwork exercise. It's not driving improvement. It's not driving better understanding. It's not driving the communication. One tip that I would add to what you all are saying is do a risk assessment. I think for most audits, and unless it's a supplier requirement to say you have to have an annual audit, I don't think that makes a lot of sense. I think we found for our newer growers, or sort of the bottom 25%, that those were folks that we really wanted to focus on. We wanted to make sure that the new growers, brand new to the business, or brand new to the company, that they understood what we expected, what we were going to be inspecting, and we wanted to partner with them to teach them the right way first. And once we did that, we found that they would stay at that top 25%. Those bottom ones, we looked at them as sort of extra TLC, tender loving care and auditing. We wanted to partner with them to try to help them, bring them along to avoid those train wrecks and try to get ahead of things. And we partnered, I think you said earlier today, looking at quality assurance with welfare. We looked at biosecurity scores, we looked at other things, and we said, okay, if they're struggling with biosecurity, they're probably gonna be struggling with welfare. A lot of times they go hand in hand. The other thing that I'm a big proponent of, and that's auditing a process. I think a lot of times we go out and we audit facilities and we look at facility-based measurements or systems-based measurements or the animal-based measurements at those, but we're not actually looking at the process. And in my mind, the biggest risk you have for a welfare incident or a safety incident is when you've got a lot of people being involved, a lot of animals or birds being handled or moved, and you've got a sort of a strict efficiency schedule where you've got to get everything done in a certain amount of time. So we spent a lot of time going out and working with crews, whether it was bird movement, catching and loading, even contract spent hen catching or vaccination crews, and just watching what they were doing, talking with them about how we could help make their job that much more efficient or that much easier. And sometimes that led to safety discussions. I wasn't the safety person, but they would say, you know what, I've got to wear these gloves because safety said I had to. And I'd say, but it looks like you're really having trouble handling the birds. Yeah, I can't hold the birds right, but safety says I have to wear these gloves so I don't get a needle stick. That's an issue. Just like that thing I put up before, we've got to look at the synergy and the pluses and minuses of things. So I think sometimes really looking at what's going on and who's doing that and helping the people understand what we want them to do and why we want them to do it is going to drive that improvement, which then drives the improvement on welfare.
Yeah, so I have two comments. One of them is pretty similar. We would go out to farms about every other year and talk to them, go through the audit tool, really have that conversation and be able to use that tool to have a conversation, talk about what we're doing, why we're looking for it, how to improve on things. And then on the other hand, I have been challenged by one of my current suppliers to audit every quarter. So they want us to audit every barn 4 times a year. And that's a little bit excessive to get around to do every barn. Not a whole lot has changed, especially in these long-lived birds. And it's something that we need to work better at doing, is getting that data out and tracking trends over time. But there is such thing as doing too much auditing on your farms.
Does anyone have any other questions? Because I have one final question. Go ahead.
This is kind of a follow-up from the whole audit discussion we were just having. And the question is, if there was one thing that you could change about animal welfare audits or assessments, or how they are conducted, what would it be? Just one thing, to keep it short.
I think we heard about 50 from Dr. Walker.
Yeah, no, go ahead. You go first.
Well, I'm the producer co-chair of the CSIA task force, so I guess if I say something, I'm gonna have to change it. That's a good question. I don't have anything right now. Does anyone have anything that you're gonna say?
I mean, it was kind of in my talk, but I do think like making it data driven, like make it make sense. Like if we could do anything for audits is to make sure we're auditing for a purpose and not to check a box. And I think audit fatigue drives that, like use the tool for good is the one thing.
So I'm going to say two things. I think one is sometimes we add and we add and we add to audits in general. And I think just more pages doesn't necessarily make a better audit. So I think we really need to think about what we're asking and why and how that's benefiting. But I think the other thing, as I talked about with, with audits, you're monitoring something, you're measuring something, but my gosh, we generate a lot of data. What do we actually do with that? And I came out of a system where we were using spreadsheets and then we were trying to move to a online platform where we could upload it and be a lot better at managing that data and sort of slicing and dicing that. But I think you have to actually do something with the data and not just say that you've done the audit, because I think a lot of times audits are done and it just goes in a folder and well, maybe now online instead of in a file cabinet, but I don't think that's doing anybody a whole lot of good.
I definitely agree with that. Also would like to add, the tool needs to be practical, especially being in production. Medicine, if there's ever a question as to why something may be on the tool, maybe that needs to be looked at. It needs to be practical and there needs to be a reason.
I guess my one thing would just be reducing the number of audits. Instead of having to do a different audit for every company and every supplier, it'd be nice to have one audit that encompassed all of these things.
Let me say something.
You're lucky. We haven't figured that out on poultry.
I like the CSIA. As you guys are talking, I'm thinking like, there's one audit in the swine industry and it's industry led. So everyone in the industry decides what the audit's going to say. It's not just a third party company that's going to come in and say, well, this is what the standard's going to be. They're producers, they're packers. They decide what's important. And we look at it every single year, just made a pretty big overhaul on it for 2026. So I'm pretty happy with what our assessment is today. So I don't have anything to change.
All right, thank you. I just have a comment related to what Cole just said. Having seen hundreds of different audit tools, it's a delicate balance with how much level of detail there is in there. If it's too vague, you don't really know what you're looking for. If it's too detailed, then, and I've seen just really specific ones that's like, why is this even in here? So it's a delicate balance. That's just my comment. But my question is, final question, if no one else has any. So y'all are really the translator, sometimes in other languages too, between the grower and the consumer, essentially, because you're the one that talks to the company, right? In one word, what change or improvement or suggestion do you have that could help bridge that gap? To both, because the grower says the consumer doesn't understand, the consumer theoretically doesn't really know what's going on. So how can you be the translator between the two parties and talk in a way where they both are going to buy in, you know?
This is probably pretty cliche. I would say my word would be transparency. When we were doing a lot of changes in live operations, and the previous culture of the company was do it because we said to do it. And when we talk about process, doing things the right way, explain why you want them to do that. Be transparent on why we're doing this extra vaccine, why we're doing this extra treatment. And so when it comes to the caretaker, the ones that are going to have to do the work, they need to understand the why. And they can also convey the why to others within the organization and outside the organization. And yeah, with customers, I do a lot of customer visits as part of my job. And I vow to always be honest and transparent. And I think honesty is appreciated when it comes to animal agriculture. So that would be my word.
I gave you 3: honesty, why, and transparency. But I think they're pretty similar.
Say ditto to that, but I think in,
Ditto is your word?
no. I would say connection. And by that, I mean, I think across all of the industries, I think the challenge that we have in demonstrating to people that warts and all, like nobody's perfect, that we do genuinely care and we're working on welfare, because we've been focused on the basics and everything, and we haven't really gotten to that enrichment part. Like we can't actually talk a lot about what we do, because nobody wants to hear that I went and trained farmers on proper euthanasia today. Nobody wants to hear about the progress about lame cows, right? So from a marketing perspective, that's breaking into jail. We're not going to talk about things dying, Jen. And so I would encourage folks who are trying to work with consumers or that consumer messaging and their customers, once we start getting farms doing these things around enrichment, that is the gateway drug when we can talk about welfare. We can talk about enrichment in birds and pigs. When we can show people that we're trying to find a path to a better life, then that demonstrates more than anything, and that can build that connection. And what we need, if we want people to trust us, they need to know that we're connected. So that, to me, it's building that connection. And that's where I think looking at enrichments and quality of life, investing around that opens the pathway to companies to be able to talk about welfare more than we can today. Because again, nobody wants to hear me train about fitness for transport. Nobody. And so I think that's the challenge.
Thank you. Definitely talking about positive aspects of welfare is a lot easier than the specifics of how they die. Yeah, thank you.
I think my word is curiosity. I'm frequently told by my husband that I have more questions than he has answers on a given day. I think that's a Jeff Foxworthy quote, but kind of pertains to just the way my brain works. And I think for both farmers and folks like ourselves in veterinary positions, as well as the consumers, it's be curious and don't assume. I think a lot of times we think that consumers just are not educated or don't know where food comes from. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But if they genuinely want to learn, I think we have to be transparent. We have to show them that we care and help them understand what we're doing and why we're doing it, and just not telling them what we think they need to know, but trying to answer their questions. So I think that curiosity will also, from a farming standpoint and an ag standpoint, will really lead us into the future. I'm a third-generation farm kid, and I think about my grandfather and, using mules to work the land and how they were, doing cotton back then, and farm is now pine trees. It's a completely different farm, but it's still farms, and I think there are always opportunities for us to grow and change and evolve, but we've got to think about how we can do that with technology and partnering together with others and helping them understand what we're doing. So I think a lot of times we just work in a vacuum or think in a vacuum and don't make ourselves available maybe to answer questions that others have.
Thank you. And to comment on that, I feel like talking about pre-internet to my students these days is pretty much your grandfather with a mule. They live in the cloud. But also it's kind of the opposite of that. They're siloed, but then there's the internet and the media, and any kind of opinion you have on something can be validated by someone on the internet. So I think it's kind of a balance again of for transparency and trying to get the right and correct and true information out there too.
I would also agree with transparency, but I would like to add education. It's the modern day consumer is so far removed. What? Yes, and so far removed from modern day agriculture, and most do not realize that we're really in this together. We're trying to produce a wholesome product for them, even though many of them may not think that that is the case. So, being honest, transparent, educating, I think is a good step in the right direction.
Yeah, I'm going on a similar theme, and it's a word that's been mentioned by, I think, just about everybody here, is understand. Our farmers need to understand why we're doing what we're doing, why we're auditing, why we're asking them to do these things for welfare. And on the other hand, the consumers need to understand what we're doing and what our goal is and what the system is, because they're so far removed from it.
All right. Well, thank you very much. These were definitely some boots on the ground perspectives for sure. And I'd like to thank everyone for coming today. Thank you to our speakers. And I hope that everyone realizes it's not just about policy or auditing, it's relationships, right, with the growers. And there has to be that trust in that relationship there. And so thank you for all that you do and everyone for coming. And that wraps us up the symposium. Thank you.